Let's talk about some news, shall we?
Welcome to the Thought Bistro podcast with Akhil and Vishrut as we deep dive into a variety of interesting and thought-provoking topics. Join us as we explore the world of ideas and broaden our collective horizon.
Yeah, there's been a lot of goings-ons in the world in the last week, so let's just cover a few bits that stuck out to us. That includes some updates on topics that we mentioned in previous episodes. So be sure to hear the updates and then please go check out those episodes if you haven't. So I'm going to start with an interesting one. Disney had their earnings today, and in the earnings, they declared that they're going to lay off 7,000 people in order to adjust some money on their balance sheet. So these layoffs have been such a major part of life right now. So I'll name some of them for your information. Disney 7,000, which was the most recent one. Google laid off 12,000 people. Amazon 18,000. Microsoft 10,000. Salesforce 7,000. Philips 6,000. Facebook was where it all began. It began with 11,000 people that Facebook laid off. Dell 6,500 people, and so on and so forth. If my math is correct with the figures you mentioned, I think we've come close to about 70 or 80,000 people just from these big tech companies. Yeah, you're correct. And I'll give you even more summarized data. In Jan 2023, there were 107,840 total layoffs. In December 2022, there were 40,000 layoffs. And in November, there were 50,500 layoffs. These are some huge numbers. The image that forms in your brain when you listen to stuff like this is, oh, the US is losing a lot of jobs and people in the US are losing a lot of jobs, and there might be a demise of the economy that might follow soon. And then something very interesting happens. So US take out the Jan 2023 unemployment report. It's called the non-farm payroll employment, the data based on which the unemployment is declared. So the number of jobs were raised by 517,000 in January. And the unemployment rate actually dipped to 3.4% in the US, which is very, very low if you were to compare to a regular time where the unemployment is generally around 4%, and Jan 21, it was at around 6.5%, which again was considered, it was low considering COVID. Then some more stats that stand out regarding this is that the wages grew by 4.4%. Again, you would think interest rates are climbing higher, as we discussed in our interest rate episode, that wages will start falling. But no, wages are not falling. The number of jobs are not falling. The unemployment number is not rising. And this is just very interesting considering all the cream of the tech companies are laying off so many people, and it feels like a bloodbath, but there is no blood. Is this because of new companies popping up? Is this because of people doing their own stuff, as we mentioned in our interest rates episode? Or is it just already established companies from other sectors hiring? I think your guess would be as good as mine is, because nobody knows what is happening. The Fed doesn't know what is happening. They are trying to increase the unemployment rate in the country, because unemployment rate is not that bad a thing. Unemployment rate also covers people who are transitioning from one job to another. Unemployment rate is also people who just finished college and are looking for a job. So having a lower unemployment also means that people are not transitioning enough. People are not looking into new ventures, and maybe it doesn't signify growth, but it is a very funky number. Even when you look at the breakdown, the highest amount of unemployed people, 10.3% of the total unemployed people, are teenagers. And teenagers are generally always unemployed. So that is like a very given thing. And adult men unemployment is at 3.2%, adult women at 3.1%. I'm throwing all of these numbers at you without context, but the context is that these numbers are super low. I remember reading in economics classes in school and college that a country doesn't always aim to have zero unemployment. You always want that unemployment rate to be around 4-5%. And I think that was the number that stuck in my head. And what you're saying makes so much sense there, because there are people who are going to be getting out of college, getting out of school and looking for jobs, and they don't find jobs immediately. There is going to be that lag time. There are going to be people who are switching jobs and things like that. So unemployment takes into account all of those people
who may be temporarily unemployed, but that's still unemployed.
So US also gives a very nice further breakdown into this. So labor force participation rate has also increased. So it is not that lesser people are working. It is at 62.4%. Historically, it is at 63%. So it is like a very comparable rate. Other than that, the number of people jobless less than 5 weeks is at 2 million people, which is like out of a total of 5.7 million. So even the total unemployed people are finding a job within the first 5 weeks. And the long-term unemployed people are at 1.1 million people, which is like longer than 27 weeks of unemployment. I just found these numbers very interesting considering all the layoffs and wanted to put some perspective to this, that it just sounds bad. It may not be as bad. And like you've guessed, that the smaller companies are the ones who are hiring. They are calling it secret hiring.
Yeah, I think the numbers just contradict the news articles, and you just realize how much information we actually are given by news agencies, how much you have to do your own reading and your own deep diving into numbers and things like that. A very interesting topic. I think we've covered a fair bit of it in our previous episodes as well. So be sure to check those out.
Yeah, even in inflation, we discussed a fair few about unemployment, and we discussed a fair few about what is happening. This is just a fascinating time. And maybe people after listening to this podcast should look forward to the next survey report. And I'll leave a link to the survey report. You can follow on into the next one whenever it comes out.
Yeah, and let us know if you like us doing these numbers, breakdowns and things like that. So we'll be sure to keep updating it as and how new survey reports come out. Moving on to the next, another topic that's linked to a previous episode, or well, our first episode, which was on ChatGPT, is that the long-awaited response from Google has finally come out. Google have launched this thing called Bard AI, which they're going to be integrating into Google Search. Now, essentially, Bard AI is based on Google's very own Lambda AI, which we touched on in our ChatGPT episodes, both part 1 and part 2. And Bard AI is going to be integrated into Google Search in order to give you a response to the more unique queries that people start putting into Google these days. As Google's CEO Sundar Pichai mentions, that people don't ask for generic things anymore. Everything is very personalized. Everything is very tailored to that specific person's specific request. So in order to be better equipped to handle specificity from each person, Bard AI is going to be integrated into the search so that it can understand what a person is trying to say better and give you that personalized response.
It kind of became like a brawl, and Google announced that we're going to have an AI event. So Microsoft announces that, oh, we're going to have an AI event one day before you're going to have your AI event. Because Microsoft owns half of ChatGPT now. So the company that drives ChatGPT is called OpenAI. And Microsoft now owns half of them. They recently acquired half of them in a $10 billion deal. They put in $1 billion like a couple of years back when OpenAI actually started getting going. And Bing is now going to be integrated with ChatGPT. Do you even know Bing anymore?
How many of our listeners know about Bing? I only know Bing because, Internet Explorer used to pop up in a new computer with this Bing, and you always had to change the default search engine to Google. That's the only reason I'm aware of what Bing is. I think we should put out a poll and see how many of our listeners are aware of Bing.
Microsoft kept pushing Internet Explorer onto me when I owned a Windows laptop. Like, it is so frustrating. You download a new browser and still it's like, oh, do you want Internet Explorer? I don't want Internet Explorer and I do not want Bing.
So I think Internet Explorer is finally dead.
Oh, it is not. They call it Edge. It's the same thing in a different press.
Yeah. I was going on to that. Internet Explorer as a name, as a concept is dead. It's been replaced by Microsoft Edge. How very edgy of Microsoft.
They keep buying these companies like LinkedIn and then they keep not doing anything with them and there is no progress. I do not like Microsoft products. Like, I just cannot handle. Even if I buy like a Microsoft laptop, I'll just convert it into a distro of Linux.
I'm right there with you, man. I have to use a Microsoft computer at work and oh my God, it is so tedious. The number of Windows updates that they get is just insane. And the issue is, if you don't install one update the moment it arrives, your entire computer just slows down. It's impossible to do any work.
And you're preaching to the choir, man. Like, don't buy Windows laptops just because you've heard of Windows. It's unsolicited opinion.
Oh, completely unsolicited and completely opinion.
In the demonstration of Bard, Google messed up. So Bard AI gave some wrong answer to some query, and suddenly, Google went into panic mode and everybody's like, oh, Google's AI is not going to be good. You cannot make this stuff up. How the world just overreacts on something they didn't even have 2 days ago. I heard this one story where this guy, he sits on a plane, and on the plane they tell you, we are going to have Wi-Fi on plane now. And it is a completely new concept. This guy's like, wow, there's going to be Wi-Fi. 2 hours later, the Wi-Fi stops working. And suddenly the guy's like, man, they can't even figure out Wi-Fi. Like, how can Wi-Fi not work on a plane? The entitlement of just like within 2 hours, people are entitled to absolutely everything.
And I think when you hear the concept of Wi-Fi on planes, people start thinking, oh, we're going to be able to stream Netflix and things like that, not realizing that there are, 300 people on board the plane, and that plane only has that much Wi-Fi capacity. So you can just barely do your WhatsApp messaging and things like that. So people will then outrage at the fact that, oh my God, the Wi-Fi is so slow. Oh my God, it's so hard to connect. 2 hours back, you didn't have Wi-Fi, period. Be happy that you have it.
Moving on to the next topic of discussion. A few people ran reports. So CNBC ran a report and Fortune ran a report. And these reports were considering debt in the US. And some very fascinating stats came out. So 64% of people in the US are living paycheck to paycheck, which means that they get their paycheck, they spend their paycheck, they don't have anything left over, and that they get their paycheck, they spend their paycheck,
Just getting into finance and, how to manage your budget 101. This is one of the worst things you can do. I think anyone you go to in order to learn about financial planning or anything like that will tell you that you must have a certain amount that you save, a certain amount of buffer and things like that, where you have some sort of safety net in terms of the money you're getting and not living paycheck to paycheck. Because here, if anything happens and your paycheck stops, or if there are unexpected expenses in a particular month, then you're just thrown.
Continuing on the topic that you were discussing, 57% of the people in the US cannot afford a $1,000 emergency expenditure. And another 25% over that will put it on a credit card and will pay it off over time because they cannot do it in a chunk right now. This is a very weird stat to me because the average pay in the US is around $65,000, which doesn't make sense. It is one of the highest average earning countries in the world. Other than that, even more fascinating is that 50% of the people making a 6-figure paycheck are living paycheck to paycheck. This is up from 42% in 2021, and the 64% living paycheck to paycheck right now, that number is also up from 42% in 2021. So people have just increased the size of their lives without increasing the size of their bands. Like, I do not know what is going on in the country. It is just overconsumption at its max.
The US always has been notorious for its overconsumption. So I guess it's just filtering down from the country to the people. I remember in school, there used to be this thing called the US National Debt Counter. And that used to keep rising in the matter of seconds. It used to keep taking over the billions, and the numbers used to just be... It was this website. It was called the National Debt Clock or something like that. And it kept... The national debt in the US kept increasing. Obviously, we're not talking about national debt. We're talking about personal debt. But this was just something that when you said US and debt, this popped into my head.
No, it still exists. In fact, somebody actually put up a physical clock in New York, which would count down the national debt, and you could see it live. That doesn't keep up with a lot of things like how much GDP is the country producing, how much growth is the country producing, how good or how bad the debt is. But on a personal scale, not being able to afford like $1,000 expenditure on, something very basic that might happen tomorrow, a speeding ticket might happen tomorrow, and you don't know where your car might be stuck. We discussed this with Kush. on the travel episode where he says that I like to keep some emergency fund with me. I am on international waters. So, even a traveler thinks about, oh, I might have some extra thing. I might have a speeding ticket, but US people just do not care. There's this YouTube channel with this judge, and the judge usually, he sits there talking about speeding tickets and is talking about very basic household problems. I'll leave a link in the description below. It's pretty entertaining to see.
I guess the people in the US need to listen into our episodes a little more and learn a little bit about financial planning.
I think that would be very helpful. Another detail that came out was the US credit card debt is now up to $930 billion, which is usually not even the GDP of most countries.
I think that is not the GDP of all bar 10 or 11 countries which are in the top few of the world in terms of GDP.
It is fairly crazy because it is enclosing $1 trillion of just credit card debt. This debt goes at 20% interest rates on average. And it is up 18% over a year. So like people are really, really spending more than they should be. And people are really not thinking about the repercussions of debt. Maybe that's what heavily debted societies teach you.
So speaking of $1 trillion and GDP, there are only 18 countries with a GDP of more than $1 trillion.
So the credit card debtors have a higher GDP than most countries. So finally, talking about bad debt, 5.67% of car payments have been delayed for more than 60 days, which again goes back to the inflation bit where, how cars are becoming much more expensive than they should be. And the people who bought cars at the time, most cars are bought on debt, again, on very heavy interest rates, which people pay to just get the car in now. They are unable to make their payments. So this might turn out to be an interesting story to follow in the near future.
Speaking of cars though, the used car market that we mentioned in our inflation episode, which we were saying that the used car market had a massive inflation, has come down. Used car prices in the US are coming down. So guys, if you're in the market for used cars, now might be the time to go and look for a good deal. Ending the episode on a little more somber note, I'm sure all of you have heard of the multiple earthquakes that have taken place in southeastern Turkey and northern Syria. These earthquakes have created some massive damage. As of today morning, today being the 9th of February, 12,000 people have been confirmed to have died. There's multiple more injured. There's so many more who are still trapped under the rubble. So the point I wanted to focus on was this whole rescue operation that is going on from around the world. And this takes me back to our Socratic debate and the points that we raised on democracies then, because there is so much politicization of this entire rescue effort. In Syria, northern Syria, because of the civil war that has been going on in the country, the northern region of Syria is being controlled by the rebels. So the Syrian government and President Bashar al-Assad has been heavily regulating the flow of aid to earthquake-affected regions in Syria, and he's making very sure that this aid doesn't reach rebel-controlled regions. In Turkey, President Erdogan visited the disaster site on Wednesday to urge people to show patience, to call for unity amongst the people. But the leader of the opposition party rejected the call for unity and said that President Erdogan was responsible for this disaster. Turkey is going to have elections in May. So this is all a build-up to that. I mean, come on, guys. Do we really think that something which is quoted as the worst earthquake since 1929, so almost 100 years, deserves to be politicized in this way? Countries all over the world are debating whether or not to send aid to Turkey because of NATO relations. I mean, this is where I feel like the democracy and the politicization of everything in the world is just taken over. Are we that selfish as people that we don't value human life? The other day in India, there was a report of India sending a 90-member team to Turkey to help in the rescue efforts. And there were people saying that why is India sending aid when India and Turkey have such strained relations politically? Like, are we seriously getting to that point where
human life doesn't matter anymore and everything is selfish, everything is about our country and me and myself, and everything just depends on that.
This opportunistic behavior is very, very negative and is such a negative image of society. And it comes up over and over again. I do not know what the answer to this is. I feel, at the time of kings and at the time of serious segregation in society where different kingdoms were ruling different lands, people did not have access to each other. People did not have access to information on what happens where, and people could not video call, and people could not be on Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, just texting each other over millions of miles. And there was no YouTube where people could just go and see physically what is happening in these areas. Now, when everybody can recognize the pain of these people, when you see the bombings in Ukraine, or when you see how bad it is in Turkey as well as in Syria, people should sometimes just shut the other side of the brain. They should just shut the conflicted side of the brain and just think of humanity as one and the earth as one. I think it'll be a much better society we'll build.
Exactly. I mean, you have to get your priorities straight. Isn't human life supposed to matter more than anything else? More than a re-election campaign, more than international relations, more than anything? Today, if you had somebody you knew trapped under one of those buildings in Turkey or in Syria and they were not rescued because help didn't reach them in time, how would you feel? I'm sure it wouldn't be the best feeling in the world. You would be outraged at the fact that, the organizational structure broke down to the extent that your loved one could not be rescued, even though they survived the major disaster that happened. But that is going to be the case for so many people. We don't even have a number that, I can even say a ballpark figure or anything like that, because I have no idea of the number of people who are trapped. And as the days go on, the probability of finding people alive under these buildings, under the rubble, just goes down exponentially. So anyway, this was just one of the things that really struck out to me. I know what's happened in Turkey is just devastating. So many lives, so many families, so many people have been affected to such a large extent. So many have lost their lives. So many have been injured beyond repair. There is a lot that is sad about this, but I feel like the thing that has troubled me the most is this selfish nature that humans, and especially our political leaders, as we call them, have shown. If these are the people we have chosen to lead our respective countries, then to me, the human future does not look very bright.
Hopefully we can ignite a little bit of fire in all of you and ignite a little bit of fire of the unity of humanity rather than the unity of India, unity of football club, unity of cricket teams, unity of US, unity of Canada. More than all of this, maybe we should start viewing the unity of the world as one. And maybe we should build towards a better world and a better future.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Thought Bistro podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and were able to learn something new. If you liked the episode, please be sure to subscribe to our show and leave a review on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow us on social media. Our Instagram and Twitter handles are available in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and we shall see you in the next